This is the wrap
For
the season or series one, as we've been calling it, of Wineskins.
Which means maybe there's a series 2.
Oh, there's so many series we have planned coming. Yeah, but we wanted this just to be sort of a 6-parter. I think at the beginning we explored the church, necessity for dependence on the Holy Spirit, and the idea that the Spirit is the one that equips the church to serve God's purposes in the world. So that was our backdrop, if you will, for what is healthy church for, what do healthy leaders look like as part of what we've been looking at. What's necessary for those who are called to lead in the church. So we had obviously talked first about calling, discernment, then we did power and authority, and then we did confession and responsibility.
Lots of good stuff.
But all of this arc has been driving at what healthy looks like in our churches. Healthy leaders, healthy communities. And I think for this last episode, we actually want to talk about why church structure matters.
Right, which I think is a really important thing. And I think as we launch, into this conversation today, just thinking about, giving this a lot of thought, because even at a, just again, for those of us in the vineyard kind of journey, been part of some global meetings recently. We've been dialoguing with our U.S. cousins, across the border, looking at our Canadian thing, and just realizing, wow, a very important part of our health, but natural growth, is looking at structures and the way that we operate together. And I think, what I'm really seeing, maybe it's a no-brainer for most people out there, but I think it's important to say, oftentimes, particularly in faith contexts, it's not so much outside of the church world, but I think inside the church world, we sort of have this romantic notion of what it means to be organic. And in some ways, we, even if we don't intend to,
there's a nostalgia.
We pit structure. Or anything organizational against what it means to be organic. Right. But as if we go to the analogy of the body, which has been something that I think that I've just been really mulling and I feel the nudge and voice of the Lord in it, is the bones are as organic as the fleshy bits of the body.
Good. The structure is necessary. It's really necessary, but it's not a necessary evil. Right.
And it's not a foreign substance that's being interjected. It actually is organic. The bones are organic material. But the fascinating thing is, it's the bones that create the most pain. So even in a healthy body, what we call growing pains, particularly in adolescence, are the bone stretching.
Right.
In an unhealthy body, and I just actually was with some people just actually recently, and I think I pretty much verified this from a medical even standpoint, the most painful pain you can experience your body is when there's unhealth in the bones.
Yes.
Particularly cancer.
Bone cancer. My mom had.
My dad did as well.
So
my dad, oh my goodness, sometimes he wouldn't know I'd be listening, and he'd be on the other side of the door, and he'd just be going, Jesus. Just weep. And my dad was not an emotional man. Obviously, this wasn't just emotion. This was legit
it was so
pain.
Much pain.
So it's really intriguing to me, and administration is part of the list of the spiritual gifts.
Right.
So I think we've got to get better at understanding that. And again, this is not a necessary evil. It's not something that's contrary. It's actually part. So if we can partner with those rhythms of growth and health.
Well, I think organic and organization are the same etymology of the same word. But I also think we sometimes, hyper nostalgia around organic kind of thinking. And we think that's got the life of the Spirit on it. And this
the other doesn't.
And that's why I'm very glad at the start of this episode about why church structure matters, you would bring up that it's listed, like leadership and administration are listed as spiritual gifts. And there is no way you can lead well and not have to have some healthy structure.
Something I've learned and still am learning, obviously, the hard way because of my wiring. I mean, I actually am I'm more systems orientated than people realize, but I'm not a great detail administrator. But what I've realized is bad admin actually hurts people.
Yeah.
Whether that's bad scheduling or whether that's double booking or missing a whatever.
It comes back a little bit to what you said on the last episode about intent and impact.
Yeah, exactly.
You can have the best intention in the world,
but
if you're flying by the seat of your pants or your team doesn't know what's going on or whatever, people are going to get hurt.
Yeah, it's true.
Or you're not going to be as effective as you could be. Exactly. It comes down to some stewardship issues in some ways.
Well, your lack of discipline, right? Particularly people that are wired in a way that can pull things off in the moment. Yeah. It's a really important lesson to go, I can't operate this way.
Sure. Well, and the other thought, you're talking about bones there for a minute. Mm-hmm. My oldest son has, here's the technical name, Hurling-Schluter-Johansson apophysitis.
Oh, come on. You made that up.
No, it's a real thing.
Hurling-Schluter?
Johansson apophysitis.
Yeah, but just the first two words.
I know.
I'm going to start a Hurling-Schluter
You can look it up later.
Yeah.
But Finley might not think it's funny that we're laughing about it.
Of course.
But the gist is this.
Wow.
He's growing so fast that his thigh bones and shin bones are having fractures from too quickly
much
growth.
Wow,
too fast.
That's interesting.
So it's not gotten solid enough in the new bone growth area. Right. And so he has to be really careful for the last year. And the good news is the doc's it will stop when you stop growing. And in the meantime, you can do your best to not have too many sharp movements.
Right.
Or jumping is a hard thing. That's why it's sometimes called jumper's knee. In basketball, because those guys grow really fast.
They do.
Make it to the NBA, have really grueling schedules, and then their legs are breaking.
That was never my problem.
No, okay. But my point is simply this. Even when things look very successful, let's say we're growing cool community or it's attractive to people, things are happening. Without good structure or strength, you can have things fracture or break. There's a knowledge base from the natural too fast.
Yes.
Sometimes I've said it this way, you grow up too quickly, you blow up.
Yeah.
So
it's true.
that idea that the mustard seed kingdom matters and it's incremental. But I think in this context of talking about church structure, it actually matters that we begin, say you're a church planter, or you're initiating some new kind of thing in the life of a local community. Mm-hmm. It's also helpful from the beginning to be thinking through the lens of structure.
I
was saying this, I think, the other day to you when we were talking a little bit about what we do in this episode. I had this thought about drivers and vehicles. So if you think of a leader like somebody who's a driver, my husband Callum's into Formula One and stuff like that. And you can find out all kinds of fascinating things. These people can have really great skill sets. But if the car sucks,
it doesn't matter.
It won't work.
It's true.
And so it's a similar sort of picture if you had to think about leadership being being the driver, but then the structure, church structure being like the vehicle.
Yeah.
The effectiveness of the skill of the driver is dependent on the quality of the vehicle.
It's really true.
Matters for us.
It does. And I think there's aspects as well of more of the structural bits, administrative bits, if you will. You don't need them until you need them.
Right. But if they're not in place.
And that's why we need actually a wide skill set and spiritual gift set in our leadership teams, in the way that we're forming. We need those voices that can see those things. You walk into a building, you might not notice that fire hydrant on the wall. You might not even know there's one there.
But when you need
it, if that fire breaks out, oh my goodness, you got to grab that thing right away.
This is also why I think healthy church structure is important for prevention rather than just intervention.
That's it, 100%.
So if all the time you have to call for some first responder, external, to come and help, you're going to perpetually be in trouble.
Yeah.
But healthy structure is like building a different road to travel on or a different way of being and doing so that you don't end up in the disaster spot. I mean, you and I we wouldn't have to think, and our listeners, you wouldn't have to think for very long before you can identify church disasters that we've heard of over the years. This horrible thing happened, that thing blew up. We should have seen that coming. Hindsight, as they say, is always 20/20.
Right.
So when you look back and you go, oh, they systematically removed all the voices that challenged them from the board of directors,
yeah,
oh,
no, it's really true.
Why did the pastor have that voting privilege? I didn't think they were supposed to. I thought they were supposed to be non-voting. Or why did that person get to stay on that board for 28 years? That's not healthy.
Not super healthy.
Right? So you could have mitigated some of these disasters if you'd had healthier structure from the beginning.
And I think, too, we can introduce, if at its raw essence, theologically, ecclesiology is actually about structure.
Yeah.
It's informed by all the things we've been talking about, our understanding of how power works, authority, character, all of those things. But the bottom line is how does the thing operate? What is the bones that are holding this whole thing together? So it's from a holistic standpoint, it's critical.
Looking for more helpful resources for discipleship, church governance, and worship? The Vineyard Canada website has practical materials that pastors can use in their services, and it also features from our various initiatives, including social justice, spiritual formation, and creative. You can find us at www.vineyardcanada.ca.
And I think, too, we can introduce, if at its raw essence, theologically, ecclesiology is actually about structure.
Yeah.
It's informed by all the things we've been talking about, our understanding of how power works, authority, character, all of those things. But the bottom line is how does the thing operate? What is the bones that are holding this whole thing together? So it's from a holistic standpoint, it's critical.
Yeah, you go all the way back to the Old Testament and the initial forming of Christian community. If you want to kind of point to it, all our structure, for instance, around how we gather as a church, a lot of that is tethered to God calling his people at Mount Sinai, right? In the Exodus narrative. Mm-hmm. But it's also the time that Moses consulted Jethro, his father-in-law, who said, appoint people, leaders over. Yeah. And then there's these categories, incremental.
Right.
So that there's a system of leadership and governance, a context in which people can be heard and responded to. You see it in Exodus, you also see it in Acts 6.
Exactly.
Hi, we have a problem in a local community. There's this ministry.
Got widows squabbling with each other. How do we deal with this?
We've got racial bias happening here, prioritizing Jewish widows over non-Jewish widows. We got to get to the bottom of this. Who's going to take responsibility for it? And they appoint
deacons.
7 significant leaders like Stephen, who we know is the first martyr of the church, who could preach the lights out, and he did, to the Sanhedrin before they stoned him.
Took him out,
Like, it wasn't sort of a lowly job for some other mercy types.
Right.
This was like, no, it required significant leadership. But they organized how they walked that out.
With the combination of the leading of the Spirit and responding to the needs as whether it was slow or quick, as growth was happening. I think one of the most helpful things to do at times is to, particularly with the New Testament, put it in chronological order. Yeah. Not just the way it's laid out. As we've got it in our bound set, And when you do that, you realize, oh my goodness, there's all these bone structures that emerge over the life and the emergence of local communities throughout Asia Minor and wherever the gospel was spreading. And you can see these different things coming into place. I mean, even some of the troublesome texts in Timothy about men and women and how all that exchange, that was all to give bones to how we're operating well together.
And to deal with a particularly unhealthy church community in Ephesus, where Timothy was sent as a young pastor to address some systemic problems,
there you go. Exactly.
So, you're 100% right. I love reading what I call reading around the New Testament to piece the narrative together.
It's important. Sometimes we think of the New Testament as more didactic. It's sort of this kind of more teaching based or whatever when we get past the Gospels and Acts. But the truth of the matter is it's narrative. It is narrative, and it is still part of that journey and story. I'm bringing it full circle back to Acts. I think the releasing of deacons, as you said, the 7, then freed up the other leaders to do some of the things where their strengths were at, preaching and prayer and all that. Which I think we have to be careful. That's not a prescriptive text going. The pastor just needs to do this. It doesn't get us off the hook. But it's that when the body was healthy. So then we take it to the Ephesians 4 again. All,
some
Jesus,
are called.
some are called. The apostles, pastors, prophets, evangelists, pastor, teachers, all of that mix is for that mending, as we've talked about, and the equipping of the church. So we're all, I love how the Message says it. So we all end up moving rhythmically together towards unity and the advancement of the kingdom. Right. That's the end game. But that doesn't happen without the very things we're talking about. Sure. And we want to get comfortable with structural
And
bits.
I think it's important to say healthy structure or best practices isn't formulaic.
Right.
It's
not a
essence.
straitjacket.
No, it's not like, oh, well, I'll call you apostle so-and-so and you can be pastor teacher such and such. And I think even what you pointed to with the Acts narrative, these guys are set aside, these deacons, to do this job so that these other ones can do this job. And yet Stephen preaches.
Right.
Right?
There you go. Yeah,
let's not be too tight in a box.
Yep.
But I also think sometimes we use that as an excuse to we won't have any structure because it'll hamper the work of the Spirit.
It doesn't.
And I think that's going to lead us to unhealthy places.
Yeah.
I mean, south of the border, you talked about our cousins in America. Boy, are they going through a big reorg, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And courageously, they've been asking some really healthy, I think, important questions. What is a vineyard church and what is a vineyard pastor? And not just saying, well, because something got going and called itself this, maybe isn't theologically aligned. Maybe the values and practices would look quite different. Maybe there's someone super unhealthy at the helm. We would go, no, that we don't want to get behind that. We would call that into account. When you read through the New Testament, governance and even church discipline, which is tethered to church governance, those guys called a spade in the New Testament. You talk about some of those letters, they're naming people by name. This one is not of the Lord. That one is sketch. Stay away from them. Don't have any fellowship with them, you think. Wow, I don't know if we would quite go at it that way. But somebody has to be leading and dealing with the gong shows that happen in the process. If you don't have any structure, you're going to have difficulty living toward health.
That's right.
Can we be practical for a minute?
Sure, go drill down.
Well, I'm just thinking, here's some ways we would understand some of what best practices might be necessary for, or examples. We've talked for a minute there, or I kind of referenced a gong show if someone stayed on a board for 28 years. Okay, so what's the best practice then? The best practice would be rotating terms.
Sure.
Now, I've heard a little pushback. Often we say 3 years is good rotating terms, but if your community's really small and you only have 3 or 4 people on your board, that can create too much rotation.
Too much change, too much.
Yeah, and then you're constantly having to fill it in, and no one actually ever really holds the ball because they're 1 year learning, 1 year responsible, 1 year exiting. Okay? Fine. Figure out what works in your context that would be healthy. Maybe it's 4-year rotation. Maybe it's 6 years, but only 3 years in this particular leadership role, i.e. chairing or treasurer, and then 3 years as a member at large. Do some homework, legwork, say on a board, but you're not in the seat like last episode. Authority and power and things can get a little nefarious for people if they hold power too long, or their identity gets too tethered to this is the only way I can function. So rather than being super black and white, Vineyard Canada isn't going to hand down a manual that says every church has to have 3-year rotating terms. We just make some recommendations for best practices, which we've been working on, and some different boards have asked us for like even the earliest iterations.
Well, I think part of the health, I mean, just if we interject here, is I think we're becoming more and more comfortable in our own skin, even as a national family.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more requests for this kind of exchange. Sure. And I think that's just a healthy sign that our bones are growing, not just locally, but nationally.
Totally. Years ago, I did a class in seminary on third wave Pentecostalism. And in the course of that kind of exploration, we studied fringe movements. And when a fringe movement is no longer a fringe, so like whether it's the Latin American house movement, house church movement, or a monastic movement in the 1500s, there's these ripple effects that happen in church history that cause maybe a prophetic awakening in the bigger church. And I don't know if the Vineyard's that, but all fringe movements, and they identified us in this course as
a fringe.
Which
is fine.
During third wave Pentecostalism.
Sure.
But they all come to a place of solidifying, if you want to use the bone image, around the 40-year mark.
Oh, interesting.
Historically. And then they get absorbed a little more into the center, and then more fringe movements kind of birth. And what they meant by, like when I was studying it and looking at what does it mean to be absorbed more into the center, is everything to do with structure and systems and organizational this and that, or they become identified, dreaded word, a denomination, right? Yeah. So there's something that happens at a certain maturing process, sociologically, that you can look at that has some implications. And then you just have to think, so why? Like, you know, there'd be the people who'd be like, and that's when they lost the... Right. But no, maybe that's when they matured and were able to really steward the thing God had given them. It doesn't have to be they became stick in the muds. And
well, I think this is why it's critical, you know, as we even started this conversation, to find that sweet spot where these things actually partner together.
Right.
Because I think, I don't even think it's about moving from pioneering to maintaining to this and that. Those are the helpful signals on the dashboard we've got to be aware of.
Yeah.
How do we hold the fire that originally birthed what we're part of?
Yeah.
Make sure that is tended and cultivated.
Right. Stay true.
Yeah, I think, you know, as Paul said to Timothy, maybe we can speak that over us as a larger family, not just as an individual. You know, make sure you're constantly blowing on those embers and fanning into flame. Yeah. You know, the things that are in you because of the laying on of hands, you know, whatever the Lord initiated and what began. But again, building a fireplace, not putting out a fire. You know, maybe that's what we're kind of reaching for.
That's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, and I think we just have to mitigate the fear that if we move a certain direction, we're going to kill everything.
Yeah.
The truth is, I think maybe particularly in the Protestant trajectories, you know, we've been so concerned about autonomy, so concerned about, and this would be probably more charismatic in the Protestant thing, that new thing.
Right.
If it's not that new thing, new shiny thing, then it's not the thing. And just going, no, there's something about the awakenings, the renewing, the reviving, and yet how do we stay faithful for the long haul without the very things that we're talking about?
Want to keep a pulse on Vineyard Canada throughout the week? Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for reflections, updates, and to gain a deeper understanding of Vineyard theology and values. Our handle is @VineyardCanada.
The truth is, I think maybe particularly in the Protestant trajectories, you know, we've been so concerned about autonomy, so concerned about, and this would be probably more charismatic in the Protestant thing, that new thing.
Right.
If it's not that new thing, new shiny thing, then it's not the thing. And just going, no, there's something about the awakenings, the renewing, the reviving, and yet how do we stay faithful for the long haul without the very things that we're talking about.
Well, and I think part of what you also might highlight is the type of leaders that often get catalytically used at the beginning of something aren't necessarily the people who are going to think about the necessity for a healthy structure.
Right.
That's why we really value the we, one body, many parts, right?
Exactly.
So then find the gifts that exist in others that are able to think structurally in strategic ways that would be healthy, making up your own lack, say, as a leader. Put some people around you. I mean, part of what some churches have reached out to us over the last few years, even as we've been trying to create healthier structure nationally, they've recognized maybe at a local level, we need some help. And so often what they do is they'll reach out and be like, hi, do you have any like sample constitution or what should we do? We have this gong show for board, or we can't get a church insurance renewed because apparently now you have to have an abuse prevention policy, which, by the way, we have a sample on our website. That's a very good one. But I say to people, look, we're not going to be able to do what the 4 C's can do. So the Canadian,
what are the 4 C's? Just
the
for
Canadian
those that
Council of Christian Charities, cccc.org. Go there. Those guys, their whole ministry is to resource the church, capital C, all denoms, with the really practical governance leadership stuff, even things like legal advice, accounting, HR practices. Like, at the very least, we would say best practices, you need some annual job review. You need proper contracts for your pastors.
Again, they don't matter until they matter.
Right. They don't,
but when they matter, they really matter.
Then you wished you'd done your preparation. But if you need like sample documents, or you need someone to consult to figure out like your gaps in HR, we're doing that even right now locally as a church with the 4 C's. That they're a wonderful resource, and we encourage our churches to have membership and to make good use of the things that are available there. Get your board members a login so they can access all the helpful tools just for governance. Have specific roles for your board members. Have specific roles, job descriptions for your pastoral team. Have some accountability in that process. So if you have lead pastors, say you're in a multi-staff situation, somebody does an annual job review with the lead pastors from your board. Maybe it's your staff liaison member on your board and your chairperson. But then you don't need the board to do all of the other staff reviews. That's what your lead pastor would do because they're leading that team.
Right, they're leading that.
But don't be like running so ragged and so busy that those things get left by the wayside, because it's actually healthy to check in. Things like salary reviews kind of scares churches, and notoriously they think, well, it's unto the Lord, so it'll all work out, or you're a person of faith, aren't you?
No, I know.
So here's a real practical thing. Look, if you don't know what a healthy wage should be for a pastor, you're going to look at the community you live in. You're going to look at census records for average wage. You're going to look at the records, which are publicly available through the school board, for what teachers get paid in your area. And you're going to look for something commensurate. If someone's pastored for 15 years, you're going to look at like a median teacher salary. If they are pastoring a megachurch and they have like, we don't have any, but like, let's say we did, then you would be looking at something more like a principal salary. Like, what's the weight that they're carrying, levels of responsibility, education, etc. So what you might get paid in a rural context in Saskatchewan wouldn't necessarily be the same as an urban context in Toronto. It isn't in public education. The same would go for the church. And you know what I've discovered over the years, and we did this even when we moved to Calgary, is if you look at the median for income for that area and the median for a teacher's salary, they're always within $3,000 to $4,000 of each other. That's a just good benchmark.
I think so.
And if you look at that and you go, crap, we pay $24,000 less in our church. That would be an indicator. It might not be a super healthy pay scale. So, you know, you can't just pull rabbits out of hats. But what's the strategy then to be able to, or maybe there's a bivocational reality or whatever. But But it's healthy for us to look at those
Right.
kind of practical
Right.
things with our structure.
And just being comfortable to have these make it a
Yes.
normalized part of communal discernment.
Totally.
It's as an important part of the
Yeah.
discerning process of how we're operating.
Well, you know what? Here's another example. It might not totally fit in terms of like a governance example, but several of our churches are advertising jobs available,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And those are also on our website,
Yeah.
vineyard.ca. But somebody from the REACH demographic, which is our younger leaders in their 20s and 30s, reached out to me and said, like, none of them list the salary offer.
Right.
Is that like part of our values as the vineyard?
Right.
Like, should I just like move my family in faith, or like, are we okay to talk about these things?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, no, you mustn't move anywhere without having these conversations. So it might not be the first thing that you need to know.
Yeah.
And an indicator, you put your hand up, hi, I'm interested in knowing more about this job. Can we have a Zoom? And you meet with someone who's on that hiring committee,
Right.
or the lead pastor, if that's the person who's doing the hiring. You're going to ask them things about what are they looking for, what your skill sets are, what you're sensing from the Lord, etc. But you're going to ask practical things. How is the church structured? Who leads? Lots of churches in our movement aren't even sure. Is the lead pastor leading? Is it the elders that are leading? Is it the board
Right.
that lead? So work out some clarity around those structures, but then ask.
Well, and that's what we want to develop nationally. I think that's part of our growing edge right now.
Yeah.
And I think part of our growing up is we're comfortable to go, look, we don't have to reinvent the wheel at the local level.
Yeah.
There's things that glue us together theologically, values-based, what we think about. We can identify some really key things, as you were alluding to, the process in the U.S., which is happening concurrently right now. What is it? How do we vet,
Yes.
in a healthy way?
Yeah.
What is a vineyard? How does a vineyard leader operate? Again, we love the whole church. It's not a competitive thing, and it's not a better, worse. But for the wheels to not fall off this bus, here's certain ways that we need to operate. Because when we step out of that lane,
There's no alignment.
no, everything just starts falling apart, and we're trying to be something that we're not. So,
But it was important, I think, I'm just circling back to this younger leader to be able to say, it's okay to ask these questions.
Exactly.
It's healthy.
yes,
So whether we're interested in
it's not
potential...
unspiritual.
No, it's just like it's practical, but that doesn't make it
No.
not godly.
Exactly.
And
No,
I
that's
think,
beautiful.
even our national structure,
Yeah.
figuring out, like you're alluding to, this younger leader's trying to figure out, should I take this job and is it going to provide adequately? But we're also trying to figure out, should we take these younger leaders? Right? If someone's kind of interested, I've got a graduate degree in theology and this and that. Yeah. I'm like, oh, that's great, but that's not a shoe-in. We would need to talk sort of what's the theological alignment? What are your values? What are your practices? What is your understanding of the Holy Spirit? What do you know about kingdom theology? What is your experience, not just theory, right? So we also would have a vetting process like you're talking about. And so that's healthy, but you have to have some structure to figure out, well, what are the questions we would ask? And what would be the criteria by which we would say, you can have a license to minister with the vineyard. So,
very good.
We're working on it.
No, it's
across
brilliant.
The board.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think this is, again, our goal here is to just initiate sort of conversation. And go, look, we want to start articulating. We're comfortable with this. Like we need to, this just is a natural part of who we want to be, and we see it as a natural part of how the church has operated historically, biblically, and it's a way into the future. Yeah.
So as we reach to be healthy leaders of healthy communities, we might have to do a bit of diagnostics. On that vehicle, if you will. A little pit stop. I'm borrowing the analogy and stretching it as far as we can take it. Maybe changing the wheels. Just do some things that will help the vehicle function better. If anyone listening, local church leader, maybe you're part of a board or an eldering team or a staffing team, and you've got resources at a local level that you've already developed, you're diagnostic.
Yeah.
We want to know about it.
We do.
We would love to share some of those resources across the country. If you're like, no, we don't, but we have a felt need.
Yeah.
Like we've been hearing, and our good friend Neil Black in leadership side of Vineyard Canada has been working on this.
Doing a great job.
We got all kinds of people saying we need help with succession and transitions. So then there's maybe more resourcing being put into that right now. That has something to do with structure.
It
has
everything to do with
how
structure.
you do your transitions. Who's the next person who's going to lead in this context really matters. And so, I think Neil's been doing a marvelous job. But even in that way, he's reached to Vineyard UK, Vineyard USA. And the metrics are pretty similar, especially south of the border. They're about 10 times bigger than us, but they got 10 times the number of churches in transition. And I would like our problem better. It's just a little smaller to manage. But these are really, really healthy. So let's share resources. Let's put our hand up and say, this is our felt need. So if you're, at a local level and you're like, well, I'm not finding anything that's helping us with this, we'd love to know.
That's great.
We can't say we have the solution.
No.
But if we hear from enough context, you never know if someone says, here's a resource, and someone else says, here's our felt need. And what if, by the work of the Spirit, those two things could be shared?
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah,
right,
I think
friends.
it's a healthy trajectory.
More to come.
More to come.
Keep listening for the next series that'll come out on wineskins, and we're just thrilled to have people on the journey together.
Sounds great. All right, Joyce. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Wineskins. We invite you to spread the word. Follow us, write a review, and tell your friends. And until next time, grace and peace in Jesus.